The chief of medicine told billionaire Harry James to go home and wait for his 10-year-old son to die. They claimed the best technology in the world couldn't stop the silent killer shutting down the boy's organs, and that his time was up. But as Harry stared at his son's graying face in the rain-slicked window of a cheap diner, he didn't realize the experts had missed a fatal clue sitting right in front of them. It wasn't a doctor who spotted it. It was a waitress with grease on her apron and a tragic secret of her own. She saw one subtle, mechanical detail in how the boy moved that proved the diagnosis was dead wrong. She knew that if they didn't break every rule in the next 60 minutes, the boy wouldn't just fade away. He would die in agony. And now, she has to fight the most powerful man in the city to save his own son. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The rain over Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside Lou's all-night diner, the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. Amy wiped down the counter for the 100th time, her movements mechanical. At 32, she had the eyes of someone who had seen too much, and the hands of someone who carried it all alone. A partially eaten plate of fries sat at table 4. A truck driver snored in the corner booth. This was Amy's kingdom: grease, coffee, and silence. She paused, looking at her reflection in the dark window. She touched the silver locket around her neck. A habit. It was empty now, but the weight of it was still heavy enough to choke her. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a woman hiding from a past where she had lost the most important battle of her life. 3 miles away, the atmosphere was different, but the suffocation was the same. The interior of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was silent, hermetically sealed against the storm. Harry James, a man whose signature moved markets, stared at the iPad in his lap. But he wasn't reading. He was watching the rise and fall of the small chest beside him. Brian, his 10-year-old son, was curled into a ball on the leather seat, his face the color of old parchment. The boy let out a sharp, whimpering breath. "We're almost at the estate, sir," the driver said, his voice soft. "Dr. Eris said comfort measures are best now." Harry clenched his jaw so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. Comfort measures. That was medical code for giving up. The best specialists in the world had called it idiopathic degenerative failure. A fancy way of saying they didn't know why Brian was dying, only that he was. "Pull over," Harry said suddenly. "Sir?" I said, "Pull over. He needs water. He's drowning." Harry's voice cracked. He couldn't go back to the empty mansion yet. He couldn't face the silence of a house prepared for a funeral. The car slowed, turning its massive headlights toward the only light in the darkness, the flickering neon sign of Lou's all-night diners. The bell above the door jangled violently, tearing through the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Amy looked up, her rag pausing mid-wipe. The man who stumbled in didn't belong here. His Italian loafers were splashed with mud, and his suit was soaked through, clinging to broad shoulders that seemed to be collapsing under an invisible weight. But Amy didn't look at the man. She looked at the bundle in his arms. Harry kicked the door shut behind him, the rain lashing against the glass like angry fingers. He carried Brian with a desperation that bypassed dignity. The boy was limp, his head lolling against Harry's chest, sweat matting his dark hair to a forehead that looked terrifyingly green under the harsh diner lights. "Just water," Harry rasped, his voice raw. He didn't wait for a hostess. He moved to the nearest booth, the vinyl squeaking as he gently lowered his son onto the seat. Amy moved before she realized it. She grabbed a pitcher of ice water and 2 glasses, her heart suddenly hammering a rhythm against her ribs that she hadn't felt in years. She knew that look on the boy's face. She knew that specific shade of gray. It was the color of a candle right before it gutters out. She approached the table, her sneakers silent on the linoleum. Harry was hovering over the boy, smoothing hair back with a trembling hand. "Here," Amy said softly, setting the water down. Harry didn't look up. He can't keep anything down, just a sip." Amy watched as Brian shifted. The movement was small, barely a flinch, but Amy saw it. The boy wasn't just curling up. He was rigidly pulling his right knee toward his chest, his small hand hovering over his lower abdomen, but afraid to touch it. He let out a sharp, shallow gasp that sounded like a saw cutting through dry wood. The sound paralyzed Amy. It wasn't just a sick kid. It was a mirror. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the smell of frying onions replaced by the sterile, sharp scent of a hospital memory she had buried deep. Have you ever seen a stranger and felt their pain as if it were your own? Tell us in the comments if you believe in that kind of intuition. "I'm sorry," Harry muttered, noticing Amy staring. He reached for the glass, his hand shaking so violently, water sloshed onto the table. It's a chronic condition. The doctors say it's the end stages." Amy didn't move. The professional distance she had perfected over a decade of serving pie and coffee evaporated. She wasn't seeing a customer anymore. She was seeing a ghost. "He's not dying of a chronic condition," Amy said. Her voice was quiet, trembling, but it cut through the diner's silence like a gunshot. Harry froze. He looked up, his eyes narrowing, red-rimmed and hollow. The grief in his face hardened instantly into defensive anger. "Excuse me?" "The way he's holding his leg," Amy continued, stepping closer despite the screaming instinct to retreat to the safety of the kitchen. "He's drawing his right knee up to relieve pressure on the psoas muscle, and he's guarding his abdomen. Look at his hand." Harry slammed the water glass down. "I don't know who you think you are," he snapped, the billionaire authority returning in a flash of cold steel. "We have seen the best specialists in Zurich, New York, and Seattle. My son has idiopathic degenerative failure. Do you know what that is? Because I didn't, until I paid $3 million to learn there's no cure." He turned back to Brian, his voice dropping to a heartbroken whisper. "Drink, buddy. Please." "Did they touch him?" Amy asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt like she was standing on a ledge. Harry ignored her, lifting the glass to Brian's pale lips. "Sir, did they actually put their hands on his stomach today?" Amy's voice rose, cracking with a desperation she hadn't felt since the night she lost her own daughter. "Or did they just look at the charts and tell you to go home?" Harry whipped around, standing up. He was a foot taller than her, imposing and furious. "Back off, now, or I'll buy this place just to fire you." "He's not dying from a disease," Amy insisted, tears stinging her eyes. She wasn't doing this for the tip. She was doing this because she couldn't watch another child fade away when the answer was right there. He's dying because something inside him is about to burst. "Enough!" Harry shouted. The truck driver in the corner stirred, but Harry didn't care. He reached down to scoop Brian up. "We're leaving!" But as Harry lifted the boy, Brian let out a scream, a high, thin sound of pure agony that buckled Harry's knees. The boy didn't just cry. He thrashed, his body rigid as a board, terrified of the movement. "Please," Amy whispered, blocking the booth's exit. "If you walk out that door, you're not taking him home. You're taking him to the morgue." Harry stood frozen, the echo of his son's scream bouncing off the cheap laminate walls. The sound had stripped the billionaire of his armor. He looked at the boy in his arms. Brian was gasping. His face sheened with a cold sweat that smelled of copper and fear. "Put him down," Amy said, her voice dropping the command and filling with soft urgency. "Right now. Gently." Harry obeyed, not because he trusted her, but because his own limbs had turned to water. He lowered Brian back onto the cracked red vinyl. The boy curled instantly into the fetal position, whimpering, "Don't, Daddy, don't move me." The rain hammered the roof, a deafening drum roll that made the diner feel like a submarine taking on water. They were trapped. The nearest hospital was 20 miles away through a washing-out storm, and Brian couldn't handle the walk to the car, let alone the drive. He's never screamed like that," Harry whispered, sinking onto the bench opposite his son. He ran a hand over his face, smearing the rain and tears together. "The doctors said he would just drift away. Sleepy. Peaceful. That's what happens when organs shut down slowly," Amy said, grabbing a clean tablecloth from a stack near the kitchen. She rolled it up, moving to slide it under Brian's knees. "But that scream? That's active pain. That's a body fighting." Harry looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the grease stain on her apron, but he also saw the steady, unshakable focus in her eyes. He was a man who commanded fleets of ships and skyscrapers, but in this booth, under these buzzing lights, he was utterly powerless. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'm positioning him to take the tension off his abdomen," Amy explained, her hands moving with a gentleness that betrayed a practiced past. "And then I'm going to prove to you that the experts are wrong." "I need you to hold his hand," Amy said, her voice steady, though her insides were trembling. "And I need you to trust me for 10 seconds." Harry stared at her. The storm outside had knocked out a street lamp, plunging the diner into a gloom that made the shadows under his eyes look like bruises. "You're a waitress," he whispered, the fight draining out of him. "Why should I trust you over the chief of medicine at St. Jude's?" Amy took a breath, and the ghost she had been running from finally stepped into the light. "Because 3 years ago, I was standing exactly where you are. My daughter, Emily. She was 6. The doctors told me it was a viral bug. They said I was being a hysterical mother." Harry flinched, the raw pain in her voice piercing his numbness. "I took her home like they told me," Amy continued, her hand hovering over Brian's leg. "I gave her fluids. I read her stories. And while I was reading Goodnight Moon, her appendix ruptured. By the time I realized they were wrong, she was gone." Silence stretched between them, heavier than the thunder. Harry looked from Amy's grief-stricken face to his son. He saw the same terror in Amy's eyes that he felt in his heart. The terror of a parent who knows the system has failed them. "Do it," Harry choked out. Amy nodded. She didn't touch Brian's stomach. Instead, she moved to the foot of the booth. "Brian, honey, I'm going to move your leg just a tiny bit. It might hurt, but I need you to be brave." She gently grasped Brian's right ankle. Slowly, agonizingly, slowly, she extended his leg backward, stretching the hip. It was a small movement, but the reaction was nuclear. Brian didn't just cry, he arched his back, a guttural scream tearing from his throat that was so primal it rattled the coffee cups. He slapped Harry's hand away, clutching his lower right side with frantic intensity. "That," Amy said, her voice breaking as she released the leg, "is the psoas sign. His appendix is inflamed and rubbing against the muscle. If it was degenerative failure, he wouldn't feel that specific pain." She looked Harry dead in the eye. "He's not fading away, Harry. He's exploding. When the experts are wrong, do you follow the rules or break them? Let us know what you would do in the comments below." Harry didn't argue. He didn't ask for credentials or second opinions. The terrifying clarity of Brian's scream had shattered his blind faith in the experts. He scooped his son up, ignoring the mud staining his silk suit. "The hospital!" Harry barked at his driver as he kicked the diner door open, the wind howling like a wounded animal. He turned back to Amy, who was standing in the doorway, rain matting her hair to her face. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to tell them. I don't know the medical words. If I go in there alone, they'll just look at his chart and send us home." Amy looked at the empty diner, then at the desperate father. She reached back, untied her grease-stained apron, and let it drop to the floor. "Let's go." Inside the Rolls-Royce, the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a war room. Amy sat in the back with Brian, her hand resting gently on his forehead. The luxury of the car felt absurd against the raw, terrified beating of their hearts. "He's burning up," Amy whispered. Harry, sitting opposite them on the jump seat, leaned forward. His face was inches from hers. "You said you lost your daughter," he said, the words heavy. I didn't mean to be cruel." "I know," Amy said softly, her thumb stroking Brian's trembling hand. "Fear makes us ugly sometimes. It makes us blind." Brian stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Dad?" he rasped. "It hurts." "I know, buddy. I know." Harry reached out, gripping Brian's other hand. His large, manicured hand met Amy's rough, calloused one over the boy's chest. For a moment, the billionaire and the waitress were just two terrified humans tethered to the same fragile life. "We're going to fix it," Amy promised Brian, looking up to meet Harry's gaze. In that look, a pact was formed. They weren't strangers anymore. They were allies in a battle against time. The automatic doors of St. Jude's emergency department hissed open, and the sanctuary of the car was replaced by the blinding, sterile reality of the hospital. Harry shouted for help, and a team mobilized, until they saw who it was. "Mr. James?" It was Dr. Eris, the chief of pediatric oncology, who happened to be consulting in the ER. He stepped forward, his expression shifting from urgency to a practiced, pitying calm. He held up a hand to stop the nurses who were rushing forward with a gurney. "Careful, this is a palliative case, comfort measures only. No interventions." "No!" Amy pushed forward, her hair wild and damp, her uniform starkly out of place among the pristine scrubs. "He has a positive psoas sign. It's acute appendicitis. You have to scan him." Dr. Eris didn't even look at her. He looked at Harry, a small, tight smile on his face. "Harry, I told you the end stages would be difficult. Confusion and pain are part of the neurological shutdown. Bringing him here, it's just prolonging the inevitable. He screamed, Harry pleaded, but his voice was shrinking under the doctor's calm authority. He screamed when we moved his leg. Reflexes, Aris dismissed smoothly. He finally glanced at Amy, his eyes flicking over her grease-stained apron with undisguised contempt. "And who is this? The nanny?" "I'm the one who actually looked at the patient," Amy snapped, stepping between the doctor and the boy. "If you don't operate, his appendix will burst within the hour." Dr. Aris laughed, a short, dry sound. "Mr. James, I understand you are grieving, but taking medical advice from a waitress, this is a billion-dollar facility with the world's best diagnostics. We have done every test. There is nothing wrong with his appendix. If we cut him open now, in his weakened state, we will kill him on the table. Is that what you want? To kill your son." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Harry looked at the doctor, looking so sure in his white coat. Then he looked at Amy, shivering in her wet clothes. "Harry, please," Amy whispered. But she saw the doubt creep back into his eyes. The weight of the institution was crushing him. "Security," Dr. Aris said softly. "Please escort this woman out, so Mr. James can say goodbye to his son in peace." 2 guards stepped forward. Harry didn't stop them. Amy felt her heart shatter. She had risked everything, reopened her own wounds, only to be dismissed as nothing more than background noise. Tension stretched the air in the ER until it hummed like a high-voltage wire. The security guards had Amy by the arms, dragging her backward. She wasn't fighting them anymore. She was staring at Brian, tears streaming down her face, mouthing the words, "I'm sorry." Harry looked at the doctor, who was calmly checking his watch, a casual, bored gesture that landed like a slap on Harry's face. In that split second, the spell of authority broke. Harry looked at his son. Brian wasn't fading peacefully, as the charts predicted. He was sweating, trembling, his small knuckles white as he gripped the bed railing. He looked like a soldier under fire, not a patient slipping into a coma. If the doctor is right, Harry thought, my son dies tonight. If the waitress is right, and I do nothing, my son dies because I was too proud to listen. The choice wasn't between medicine and madness. It was between a sterile certainty and a messy, terrifying hope. "Stop," Harry said. It wasn't a shout. It was a vibration, low and dangerous, the voice of a man who built empires. The guards froze. Dr. Aris looked up, annoyed. "Harry, please, let's not make a scene." "You checked his blood," Harry said, stepping closer to the doctor, his expensive shoes clicking rhythmically on the tile. "You checked his brainwaves. You checked his genetic markers." He stopped inches from Aris's face. "But she is the only person in 6 months who actually looked at my son." "She is a waitress," Aris sputtered, his composure cracking. "And you are fired if you don't get him to an OR in the next 3 minutes, Harry said, his voice ice-cold. "I don't care about the protocol. I don't care about the diagnosis. You are going to scan his abdomen, now." "And if I find nothing?" Aris challenged, his face reddening. "If I put a dying boy through the trauma of a scan for nothing?" Harry turned to look at Amy, who was standing breathless as the guards released her. He saw the grief etched in her face, the grief of a mother who had already lost this bet once and was willing to stake her soul on not losing it again. "Then I'll lose everything," Harry said softly. He reached out a hand to Amy. "But I'm betting on her." The waiting room clock ticked like a bomb, counting down. 1 hour. 2. Harry didn't pace. He sat next to Amy, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. The barrier of wealth had dissolved completely. He was just a father, and she was the only person in the world who understood his terror. "If I'm wrong," Amy whispered, staring at the floor. "You aren't," Harry said, though his voice shook. "I saw his eyes when you touched him." "You saw him, Amy. You were the only one who saw him." The double doors swung open. It wasn't Dr. Eris. It was a trauma surgeon, his mask pulled down, looking exhausted but clear-eyed. Harry stood up, his legs trembling. "My son?" "It was retrocecal," the surgeon said, pulling off his cap. His appendix was tucked behind his colon, completely hidden from standard scans. It had been leaking slowly for weeks, causing the sepsis that everyone mistook for degenerative failure. "It ruptured an hour ago." Harry stopped breathing. "But," the surgeon smiled, a genuine, tired smile, "we got it. We flushed the infection. The incurable disease is gone, Mr. James. Brian is going to be fine." Harry collapsed. He didn't fall. He just crumbled into the chair, covering his face as a sob tore through him. The sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 6 months, finally exhaling. Amy didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him, and the billionaire wept into the shoulder of the waitress's uniform, holding onto her like she was the only solid thing in the universe. An hour later, in the soft light of the recovery room, the miracle was visible. Brian was sleeping, but the gray pallor was gone, replaced by the faint rosy flush of life. Harry sat by the bed, holding Brian's hand, but his eyes were on Amy, who was standing by the door, ready to leave. "Where are you going?" Harry asked softly. "My shift." Amy gave a tired, small smile. "I'm probably fired, but I should go check." "You're not going back there," Harry said, standing up. He walked over to her, taking her hands in his. "You gave me back my life tonight. You saw what the world missed." "I just paid attention," Amy whispered. "Exactly," Harry said, his eyes searching hers, finding a warmth there that he hadn't realized he was starving for. "And that is a rare gift. Brian needs that. I need that." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't go back to the diner, Amy. Come home with us. Start over. Let us take care of you for a change." Amy looked at the sleeping boy, then back at the man who was looking at her not as a servant, but as a savior. She touched the empty locket at her throat, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like permission to live again. "Okay," she whispered. Outside, the rain had stopped. The storm was over, and the sun was just beginning to rise. Sometimes, the most qualified person in the room isn't the one with the degree, but the one with the heart to see the truth. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles are real. And let us know in the comments. Have you ever had a gut instinct that turned out to be right? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that touches the soul. Until next time.